I'm going to do my task at hand because that's what you hired me to do. And I want to make sure that I do it and I do it great. But I also want to see what are some other opportunities that we could do to expand on the company. We had raised a good deal of money, $350 million. And I got to be part of a core team to decide, okay, what are we going to do with $350 million?
Hey everyone, this is Jeff Apfel and you're listening to Office IQ, a podcast that talks about the skills and strategies that lead to success at work and in your career. If you're enjoying the show, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening so you can stay up to date when new episodes come out. On today's episode, we're joined by my longtime pal, Jeremy Reed. Jeremy is a content and marketing executive with 25 years of experience. He's also led not one, but 2 companies to an IPO. Jeremy shares his background in writing and publishing, talks about the importance of having an equity stake in the company you work for, and he discusses the beauty of getting to know your coworkers on a personal level. Here's Jeremy. Jeremy, thanks for taking the time, obviously. And yeah, we have known each other for a very long time, and I'm glad that we've stayed in touch through the vast majority of that time as well. I just wanted to start out by having you sort of introduce yourself and sharing your story, basically, how you got started in business, and really even before that, I guess, if you want to just share where you went to college and up until today, basically. So if you can maybe get started with that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things too to think about it, when Jeff and I first met, Jeff was working on the second floor. I was working on the first floor. I was in content. He was in legal. We had very little reason to cross paths, but when we did, we always struck up conversations. We developed a relationship, and I probably worked with Jeff outside of CitySearch, which, was, more than 15 years ago. We both worked there for several years. We worked together on projects over and over and over. So we're still kind of crossing paths just based on, the relationship that we developed way back when.
Yeah.
I came out, so I grew up in Texas and I went to a small Methodist private school. My parents are both professors there. And I got a degree in communications. And in my senior year, I kind of realized, I wanted to write. And I didn't know what I wanted to write. And I love music. I had done 2 free internships, one at a radio station, another one at a magazine. And I had always wanted to live in LA. So I packed up my stuff. I moved out to LA. I had a bartending gig with a restaurant named Beer Paredes that was based in Texas, but had one outlet in California. Mm-hmm. And I set post in LA all by myself. And I started to crack the nut of what I was going to do with the rest of my life in terms of a career. And it certainly was not easy. As I look back on it, I found a job working for the magazine that I worked for in Dallas, actually moved out to LA at the same time. Became managing editor, really in title, not really in salary. Continued to bartend at night, and that was where I made my money. And then really, really worked hard, to kind of learn the craft. And, I was working around the clock. I probably worked more hours, if you combine that with bartending at the same time. Mm-hmm. But I learned a lot. It was one of those things where I was managing editor, but I was also the guy responsible for getting lunch. I was the guy responsible for picking up the dry cleaning. I was the guy responsible for tracking down photo credits, and everything.
How many people worked at the company at the time?
It was
you were there?
2 guys that ran it out of a house off Franklin in North Hollywood. And we had 3 full-time employees and a bunch of freelancers. And it was a crazy spot. I mean, it was like, Shannon Doherty was there a lot. It was a fashion magazine. I was not a fashion guy growing up. I had good style, but nobody would pick me out to be the guy who ended up at a top classy international fashion museum. But I got there because I worked for them in Dallas and we had a connection. And so from there, I worked there for a couple of years, and then LA spit me out. I came back to Dallas. I worked at the Fort Worth Star Telegram. My dad had been a book reviewer for them for many years.
Neat.
So I wrote some articles for them as a freelancer, continued to bartend, and then, thought, okay, what am I going to do next? And I bounced up to San Francisco, started my own magazine called Nothing Shocking, covering a whole bunch of arts and entertainment. We had about 20 people, myself and my co-founder, and we distributed in major college towns in Austin and other major cities in Texas, and then, of course, in San Francisco, where I was living.
How old were you at this time? By the way, I had no idea. I don't think we never talked about this. How old were you?
Yeah, so I was probably, mid-20s at this point.
So mid-20s and you start your own business. Like, that is definitely not common. At least not, it's certainly not back then, right? Without getting into details of like dating ourselves. But like, these days, yeah, it's probably more common. Students are probably in college starting a business out of their dorm room, right? But 20 plus years ago, that wasn't that common. So what sort of drove you to do that?
I think at the time, at the time, this concept of fanzines was really big. So self-publishing was starting. Printed 1,000 magazines that cost $1 per issue. So you're talking at least $1,000 baked in. And I actually did it because I had worked at a magazine, but I had always really wanted to understand the full business. And so, this magazine that we did for a year and a half that eventually took me to Austin, allowed me to figure out, okay, how do I sell sales? How do I come up with an ad sheet or a price sheet? How do I do illustrations? How do I eventually do layout?
Okay.
And, I relied heavily on friends who knew how to do all of that. But, that started to wear thin. What you realize is that your friends have their own passions and their own things. And at the end of the day, it was myself in a room late at night trying to figure out, okay, how do I lay this out in Cork, which was a design program? How do I track down photos for this artist that we interviewed? And then, how do we get it to a publisher, or how do we print it, and then how do we get it out? But it was a great lesson. And what ended up happening was I showed up in Austin, and, people weren't waiting for me to come into town, but people knew a little bit who I was. And by having that, I ended up getting 2 different jobs. One, which was a good paying job, doing production for B2B magazines, so business to business magazines. So I was laying magazines based on what I had learned doing this passion project on the side for more than a year and a half. I didn't go to school. I didn't have any design lesson, but I ended up getting to do production. So I was laying out, international construction and water and wastewater magazines. My biggest cover we did was porta potties in Egypt, historical sites, which was cool.
Wow.
And then, by that time I had 3 jobs. I was doing that. I got to write for the Austin Chronicle because Margaret Mosier, who was a big personality and fan, had seen my fanzine around coffee shops and bars and recognized it and wanted to give me a shot. So I started to write about everything for the Austin Chronicle, which was, at the time, the alt magazines were the place to write. Now you have all these digital spaces, you have Time Out, you have Infatuation, you have what we did together, CitySearch. But before that, the only thing were the print magazines. From that, it led to the Statesman, which was great, the Austin American Statesman. And so I had these 2 jobs, one day job doing that, one night job covering mostly music, but other stuff. And then I continued to bartend. I bartended on 6. And so, up until the time I was really 28, I was doing 3 different jobs. And then at 28, I had a major fork in the road, which was I had 3 job opportunities in the matter of a couple of weeks. And one was to be the music critic of the Austin American Statesman. Another one was to stay with my B2B job and move to Atlanta and move into the spa and pool division. And then the third one was CitySearch.com, which was, at the time, nobody wanted to go to digital. Everybody wanted to stay in print. I was actually fascinated by digital because, you didn't have a certain shelf space. You could kind of write and create and do as much as you want. It was really the Wild West. I didn't get the job at the Austin American Statesman. I lost out to a guy who had been the local editor there for 15 years and is still writing about music today. I didn't take the pool and spa because not unfortunately, my father died during that same period, and I just needed to be in Texas. My parents were in Arlington. Austin was 3 hours away, and so I made a family choice to take the CitySearch job. And it was one of the best professional decisions I ever made. I got in with a company that gave me a wonderful ride for 8 years. I started as a music editor in Austin, got promoted to a managing editor, got promoted to the editor-in-chief, got promoted.
When was this? What year was that?
It was around 1998.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you were there for 6 years before we met.
Yeah. So I was there when CitySearch was a true startup, and there were 6 different cities. When I left there 8 years later as the head of content, content team that was 40 people, in 22 markets, coverage in 144 markets, and we went public. And so I had the benefit of doing what everybody calls sweat equity. And, truthfully, it's one of the reasons I was able to buy a house was to come up with a down payment. And from there, I ended up going. And so that was a wonderful ride. And many of those editors spread out, I've continued to work with over the years. From there, I went to Tastemade with a coworker that worked with you and I, Larry Fitzgibbon. And that, I lucked out. It was a company started by Richard Rosenblatt, who had just done MySpace, had one of the biggest exits ever to Rupert Murdoch when MySpace got bought by Fox. And then I was off on another ride. And so at that company, we had raised a good deal of money. I think at the time it was, $350 million, which was almost unheard of. And I got to be part of a core team to decide, okay, what are we going to do with $350 million? Which was great.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was great. For me, we did a lot of acquisitions. So I got to see how a lot of companies were built from the inside out. I got to build a large content team. We built a large content management system. So the ability for us to publish content on a bunch of different sites. We grew brands like eHow, Livestrong. We worked with celebrities like Lance Armstrong, Rachel Ray, and Tyra Banks. And we eventually went public. So we went public as $1 billion company on the back of the second largest IPO after Google.
Wow.
And it was great. It was wonderful. And then, like everything, businesses are up and down. We took a hit because some of the traffic that we were getting from Google stopped. We tried to shift our business, and you can imagine when you've got a really big business like that, when you're trying to shift it, it's so much harder when it's that big.
Yeah.
But I felt on top of the world because I had been part of 2 startups, and both of them went public. Which Jeff, you probably know the odds better than I do, but that just doesn't happen.
It's pretty rare. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then from there, I kind of, I really got in my mind that I didn't want to be the content guy. I wanted to understand the full business. And so I got offered a chief operating officer role at Centerfield, which was a business I completely didn't understand. It was lead generation. We made our money driving people to purchase insurance. So imagine top 5 insurance companies. and then we made a percentage of that money. It was really, really difficult because I was in a new discipline and a new vertical within the industry. I ended up being there for a year and a half, and then finally decided to, go back to what I love and try to figure out if I could do my own thing. And so my wife and I launched a business called Intersection Cities, where we launched some local sites, Lincoln and Rose in here in Venice, California, Maine and PCH. Jeff helped me on that business. So that's another example where we kind of overlapped. And it was great. We set up an online marketplace. I learned how to ship goods. I learned how to create our own merchandise. We had T-shirts that were our number one seller, and we grinded it out. Ultimately, getting to the point where we had a physical location, both in Venice and Huntington Beach, where we sold those goods. We came to life with local makers. And it was really a local marketplace to highlight local makers. But I learned a lot of stuff there. We overbuilt it. We spent way too much money. I was the guy who was managing costs. Somebody wasn't above me managing costs. And I really learned a lot during that period. From there, I was ready to get back into a full-time job. I worked at Tastemade. Again, with Larry Fitzgibbon, who you and I work with at CitySearch. That was great.
Sorry to interrupt, Jeremy. So earlier, I think you mentioned Tastemade, but you meant Demand Media, right?
Yeah.
It's Demand that went public.
Demand Media went public. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. And then more recently, Tastemade.
Yeah.
You joined. Okay. Got it. All right.
Yeah. And that way, I think the thing with Tastemade is, I went back into an environment where I was working with people I knew. I was not a founder. And, we were building a product that I was really proud of. Tastemade is a global brand, really around food, now around travel. And loved it. Spent 3 years there, really enjoyed my time. But again, I was ready kind of for the next thing. So what was I going to do next? And then, bounced around, started another company with, former CEO of CMO of the movie business, called Players Academy. That was really like the master class for sports, and spent a year on that. But that was right in the crux of COVID. So, we couldn't raise money. People were scared to invest. We couldn't produce content because we were shooting content around pro players, and the pro leagues were not playing. It was bizarre.
What a bizarre time.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
And then, most recently I was the CMO at Best Reviews, which was a product review site, been around for 10 years. We really did it the right sort of way, kind of like Wirecutter and Consumer Reports back in the 1980s, still around. And then we got acquired by Nexstar, which owns a bunch of TV stations. I think, last count, 211 TV stations in the U.S.
Wow.
And through there, I was able to really learn about broadcast TV and the power, producing TV segments as well as a national TV spot. And then also working very closely with Amazon, which is always great to work closely with a company like Amazon, who keeps everything kind of close to their vest. And you don't learn a lot, but there's nuggets of stuff that creep out that you really do learn. And you're kind of beholden to them on your business, which we were. But it was pretty fascinating, and so now here we are.
That's awesome. You mentioned, actually, I was just typing some notes as you were talking. You mentioned a lot of several things that I want to revisit just briefly. One of them is equity in businesses, and that's one of the things that I emphasize with my daughter, who's going to be starting college, as literally in a couple weeks. When we have conversations around, her career or what she thinks her career path is going to be. And I emphasize to her, like, hey, because she of course wants to be successful, and what she means by success is money, right? Is just earning a high income, and being able to buy things, take nice trips,
Yeah.
own a nice house, this and that. And I explained to her, I said, hey, that's great. Like, we should all have that as an aspiration, among other things, right? That are probably more important in life than assets, or just, material things. But if you want to be able to afford what you're talking about, you need to have a stake in the business that you're working for. And so, you had mentioned that you were able to get equity in two companies and more, but two that materialized into something important, in terms of stock sale, right? And income that comes along with that. Uh, is that mindset of owning a piece of the pie, do you think, more important these days for younger employees? So, whether it's new hires right out of college, or young professionals that are in maybe the first 5 years of their career, or do you think it's not even like top of mind for them, just based on like younger professionals that you've hired over the years, or that you've worked with over the years, or maybe even family and friends, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was coming up in my 20s, the businesses I worked for were small businesses, so really didn't have an equity pool.
Mm-hmm.
Or they were older businesses, like newspapers, that you didn't really get into that unless
Right.
you moved into management. And when I got to CitySearch, they had a mentality that they wanted everybody to have a stake at the company,
Mm-hmm.
because whether you were the most junior full-time person or the most senior, everybody wanted to see the company grow and go public, which I thought was an amazing sort of thing. Like, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And, it's always difficult to talk about salaries and who's making what, but at least you could always say, hey, look, we all have a piece in this company.
Mm-hmm.
Da, 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 da. So I always believe that you should have a piece in the company. And it's like I said, it is so incredibly rare that you have an exit. Those are the only two
Mm-hmm.
exits I had in my life so far. And they happen early on in the career. And so
Mm-hmm.
as I kind of get older, and I kind of think about your daughter, which I actually think is right. As sales lead said, one of the smartest things to me, which is you make money to afford the things you want to do outside of work. So if you can, make more money at work, your time's well spent, and therefore you can follow your passions and do your good and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think you should always have a piece in the company, but I don't think you should do it in lieu of a big part of your salary, unless, of
Mm-hmm.
course, the earlier on in your career. So you're kind of saying, okay, I'm making enough to cover my rent. I'm making enough to take my vacations. I have some room to take some chances, and I really believe in the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think what happens is when you're going through the interview process, I tried to learn this, and I don't think you can learn this, but I tried to learn the value of the stock. It was the question I was asked. So, okay, you're going to pay me this amount of money, and you're going to give me 50,000 shares. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
what is that worth? And you could sit down with the most senior financial person in the company, and you still couldn't get to a true answer. And
Yeah.
so I think you always have to look at equity as, as not part of the core, something that's part
Mm-hmm.
of your package, like health insurance and benefits and that.
Yeah.
But, focus on your core comp and then make sure that equity is a part of it, just like health insurance.
Yeah. So would you suggest to young professionals or college students even that they seek out employment with a company that does have, an equity pool,
Yeah.
an option pool, rather than going for a big brand name, right? That provides, let's say, a competitive salary, benefits, health, all the other sort of ancillary benefits, but does not offer equity, at least to the vast majority of employees.
Yeah, I mean, I see it more and more. My last company, Best Reviews, was owned by Nexstar.
Mm-hmm.
A multi tens of billion dollars company. I mean, it's a behemoth. And,
Mm-hmm.
We were a startup that got brought in, and nobody had equity in the company of Nexstar. It was only senior folks. And I really do think that having some equity in the company just makes the morale and the energy of the group.
Totally, 100%.
So I would definitely look for that. What I wouldn't advise is that you take a 50% of your salary comp in equity.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would do, and what I've seen, and what I would have done more as my own entrepreneur, is giving out equity in companies that are up and coming that you do as side projects or night projects.
Right. Yeah.
You've done it before, right? You can give legal advice. I can give content advice. And not advice, like real hard work, drafting documents, content. And that's a good way to doing it. But I mean, in the career, in the workforce, you should have a stake in how the company succeeds.
Yeah, I agree 100%. One other thing that you mentioned I want to go back to is these shifts in your career path, right? So you went from being focused primarily on content, right? Content generation, managing that content, distribution, but then you shifted to become an operator, right? COO. I mean, yes, I was later in your career, but is that something that you wanted to do, or kind of the opportunity just presented itself? It sounds like it was the former, like you had the mindset of wanting to expand your skill set, expand the your breadth of experience. Is that correct? Like,
yeah, I mean, in hindsight, just hearing it back to myself, I think when I started that magazine, part of the reason I started the magazine was that I can learn all parts of it, all disciplines.
Yeah.
And I didn't plan to become the greatest artist, even though I did some illustrations. I certainly didn't plan to become the best salesperson. But I knew that I could actually do each of those things. I put my mind to it. And I think what I had seen is, especially in my vertical of content and editorial, I saw product folks, I saw legal folks, I saw sales folks all take on chief operating officer roles. And I thought, well, why can't content folks do that? I'm in this industry. I understand it. I don't need to know how to code, right? But I need to know how to manage engineers and their ability to code. And it was really,
and maybe even speak their language a little bit.
Yeah.
Because they do often speak in a different language. Yeah.
Yeah. And really what ends up happening is, a lot of those times, I learned some of it within work, but I also learned it from, passing by the desk and, striking up relationships and conversations. And, I always say, and I always think, and I have to remind myself, the best relationships I ever created were not with my bosses, were not with the founders of the company, though you would think they were, because I worked for them multiple times. I had big IPOs. My most beneficial personal and professional relationships were my peers, many within the same department, but also many outside my department.
Yeah.
I invested in those relationships. I always say there's this complex of, and I'm dating myself, but there was a character in Leave It to Beaver called Eddie Haskell. And Eddie Haskell was the guy who came over and, kissed up to the parents and then was a horrible friend to everybody in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Parents finally read through and said, "Oh, you're an Eddie Haskell." And so I wouldn't be an Eddie Haskell. Like I would, I would, show respect to the people that I worked alongside of as much as I would to the people I reported to. And that was a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sliding either.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. So relationships, like developing those strong relationships with your peers, being respectful, of course, to your, manager, people sort of higher up the food chain than you at the company. That's what you should be. I mean, unless a person deserves disrespect, which sometimes we'll see from time to time, but, but not sort of treating them as, these sort of superior figures, because they're really not, right?
Right.
In my opinion. So treating everybody with respect, but establishing those relationships that you mentioned with your peers is really what benefits. It doesn't just, you can't look at it just as, oh, how do I benefit myself? But, some of these relationships develop into, professional relationships in other, businesses, other sort of situations within the business world. But I think this is probably applicable to you as well. Some of my closest friends that I have today, I didn't grow up with, I didn't go to school with, I met at work.
Yeah.
And some in my own department, other times not, working in some, I don't know, finance or something like that, or as, an engineer or something. So, that's crucial. And then you're very entrepreneurial. And I think when somebody hears that term, they think, okay, starting their own business, right? Which you have done on several occasions, but you can also be entrepreneurial working inside of an organization. And by that, I mean, you actively seek out knowledge in areas outside of your own expertise. And that is something I actually emphasize in one of my courses. And so that strikes me as being critical to your success, and really anybody's, is that you're just a naturally curious person. And so you seek out the skills that you don't have, but you can develop. And that doesn't just add value to the organization. Of course, it adds value to you as an individual, so that when you start, when you move on, let's say to, I don't know, a different organization, you've just increased your value, which means that the company may actually want to provide you with equity that they otherwise wouldn't have for maybe your skill level, or not your skill, your experience level at that time. So it opens up a lot of doors. I think it's something that is really important for people to hear.
Yeah, what you just said, give me a second to reflect back on it, but you made me think of three things. The most important thing is, the relationships you meet could turn into something big. Today, I celebrate 13 years of marriage with my wife.
Congratulations.
We work together. So that's a huge bonus, both business and professional. I'm incredibly lucky there. And then another thing I think about is, you talked about, when you, there are people, whether it's your boss or your peer, that need to be reprimanded, right? Or need to be addressed. And a big lesson that I learned is when I was at Detour Magazine, one of the main reasons I was there is because I wanted to publish articles in this global magazine. And, I had worked over Christmas break and the owners didn't pay me. And I made a big stand and I said, you know what, I'm quitting. You guys get back from the holiday, I'm quitting. I sent, a dismissive email. You know what, this was pre-email. So I wrote a letter. I typed it up and I left it on their desk for when they arrived. And it was a really petty letter. It was me saying, they were bad managers, bad people. And in reality, what I should have said was, I think it's time for me to leave. I've decided to move on to my next venture. I wish
Mhm.
you all the best, because all the petty comments that I made in there didn't benefit it. And the same thing where if you have a bad boss and that bad boss is not standing true to your one-on-ones, is not showing up for you in terms of meetings, speak in specifics.
Mhm.
Not having our one-on-ones every Friday, and I really want to make sure that we get them on track. That's it.
Mhm.
Don't say you're a worse boss. Don't get personal. Just be very clear. And what you end up doing is you realize if you just stick to the facts, man, um,
Mhm.
that's the way to handle those relationships. It's not getting personal. It's certainly not getting bitter. Um, and it doesn't benefit you. And ultimately, what you're looking for is the benefit to you, not to them, not to the company, but to you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. It's natural for a lot of us, not everyone, but a lot of us to want to emote.
Yeah.
And that's fine, right? Like you should show emotions, but there's a time and place and a manner to every situation. And I would say, uh, you know, being at work, it's not the best time to emote. Um, just to kind of vent your frustrations. You can do that, but it needs to be in a smart way, as you say, just sticking to the facts and let the facts sort of speak for themselves, because they will.
Yeah, and I also don't apologize for the emotions. Um, there are big things that happen while you're at work. People that you love die, and you get the news, and you're looking to see who's around you that you can tell, right?
Hmm.
You have a really bad day. You have a breakup.
Yeah.
There.
Well, that resonates quite a bit with me. I don't know if you had already left CitySearch at the time, but um, I was at work, and I think you were. When did you leave? In 2006?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you were there. So yeah, I got the phone call that my dad died
Yeah.
when I was at work,
Yeah.
and sitting. This is very interesting, actually. Sitting next to me was our good friend John.
Yeah.
And of course, he was trying to console me. But as I went into a conference room to call my mom, so it was my mom who called me. It's like this open sort of work environment, right? With these, you can't even call them cubicles, right? These like maybe 16-inch tall screens or something. No privacy or whatever. So my mom called me, to share that tragic news with me. Couldn't really handle it. Hung up the phone. Kind of tried to collect myself a little bit, but I walked to a conference room to call her back and just find out the details of what happened.
Yeah.
And as I left, I'm not going to name names, but you probably know who I'm talking about. There was a very senior person who really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way at work. And I never had, a friendly relationship with this individual. But he saw, as I left the conference room, he saw that I was, white as a ghost.
Yeah.
And that there, just the expression on my face, like there was clearly something wrong.
Yeah.
And he was the one who walked me back to my desk and consoled me and was like the most comforting person. It was so interesting, like reflecting back on it now, how different that person was at that time. But he was, and it kind of made me think, okay, well, he's really thick-skinned. He's incredibly tough on everybody that he works with, but it's for a goal,
Yeah.
right? And it's not to make excuses for poor behavior or anything like that, but I looked at things in a different light, looked at him in a different light, because I saw this like very compassionate side that nobody, I think, had ever seen,
Yeah.
at least as far as I know, and certainly not at work. So anyway, that obviously popped in my head. Sorry for the aside. So
That,
you mentioned one. Go
I
ahead.
was
Yeah.
going to say it, but I mean that's the beauty of getting to know people on a personal level, and not
Yeah.
trying to feel like, you know, there are ways that you can do it. Hey, what did you do this weekend? Questions and stuff like that. But it's also just, you know, there are as bad there are as many bad managers as there are bad employees, right? And they're all struggling with what they call the IQ or the EQ, right? The
Yeah.
intellectual side
Yeah.
or the emotional side. And very rarely do you find somebody who's got both of them. And so it was great that you probably had a different relationship with him after that, or
Yeah.
or her after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing I was going to say about the entrepreneurship. So the third point
Yeah.
was,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things about the entrepreneurship is you nailed it. I do think it's a disciplined entrepreneurship, and it's not, hey, I'm going to go start my own company and I'm going to do this. It's, hey, I have an entrepreneurial spirit that I'm going to do my task at hand because that's what you hired me to do, and I want to make sure that I do it and I do it great. But I also want to see, okay, what are some other opportunities that we could do to expand on the company? And if you know entrepreneurship, it's like a 1 in 100 thing that's going to hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be willing to kind of pitch these ideas, weave these ideas, and have people table it and say, hey, not right now. It's not the right thing. But you can also do entrepreneurship just by hooking your wagon to somebody else's great idea, and then getting your wins through those peers. Like finding out, okay, you're working on something interesting. I think I can help because my discipline is this. Let me do this, and you guys start to develop something. And that entrepreneurship within the company, to me, is the most interesting and ideal because you already have the funding baked in. You're not spending half your time raising money. You're really working
Mm-hmm.
within a system that already has the four walls.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, I think that's
it's
great.
a great point that you made, that entrepreneurship really is not starting your own thing by yourself with nobody else involved. It is really, developing a seed that either comes from you or somebody else, and figuring out how to make it a reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. All right. Well, so let's maybe wrap up with this one point that you made earlier yesterday, and that is sort of words of wisdom that you'd want to share with people that are maybe still in college, about to graduate, maybe have recently graduated, or maybe they're, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years into their career. You had mentioned a few things. One is nailing the task that you're given and then do more. The second was under promise and over deliver, which I love. I think it's very important actually, because the inverse of that is I mean, it just sets you up for bad things, and like reputational damage. And then solving problems and avoiding creating problems. So do you want to maybe elaborate a bit on one or all of them if you want?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the under promise, over deliver. One of the things I really think about, and I spend a good deal of time, is managing up and managing expectation. And in a startup environment, you're always tasked with, is this $100 million business, right? You've always got to dream big. I recently read a stat that 65% of the initiatives that Bing has done has failed, and Bing is just typical, not an anomaly or one of the worst. So you have to imagine that you're going to do a lot of things that aren't going to see fruition or payback. And so what I really think about is, before you say, "Yep, I can do it," consider
Mhm.
part of a team. Go back to the team and really get the team's input and said, "Okay, we need to accomplish this task. We're being dictated to do it this way. I want to make sure that we can do it in the smartest way with the best resources. How do we do it? And then make sure that every time you're communicating a scope that you can do, that everybody is involved in. And that's really important, because I think that's one of the biggest things. And then another one that's not on there, but that I think is really important, especially in a junior, is to bitch up, not down.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
So it's one of those things where in an environment, especially an environment that has so much social media, so much, non-in-office companies, which I think is wonderful. But I also think that there's a real maturity and camaraderie that comes with working side by side with somebody, especially late on a Tuesday night with a product push, and you're there till midnight and you're ordering pizza. Like, you're bonding over that. But it's to really make sure that if you're complaining about something in the company, you take that to your manager first before complaining about it to somebody else. So if you have an issue with somebody else in another department, don't get poison within the department about this other issue. Go to your manager and talk about it. Because really what ends up happening is what happened to me in one case. I was a junior manager in Austin. I was a new manager in a team. They were complaining about their former boss who had taken on a bigger role. I ran into my new boss, who is the head of the group, and complained, and she opened the door, invited the other boss in, and I had to tell that person straight what was being said. And it was the best lesson I learned, which is just,
wow.
There's no benefit in doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
totally.
And then, I think in the last thing, like you and I did not, I knew your father had passed, but I did not know that moment. But it really is, there's a wonderful aspect that comes out of work, but it's not necessarily the company. I don't look back on CitySearch and say, I love CitySearch and what we built,
right?
Because in fact, CitySearch doesn't exist. Everything we did is no longer online.
Yes. Yeah.
And a new generation only thinks about Yelp. They don't think about CitySearch. So to say I love CitySearch would be a disservice. I love the relationships that came. I love the knowledge that came. To your daughter's credit, I love the money that came, that afforded me. Love my wife that came out of it. But it was not the company that I was loyal to. It's all the things that came out of the company that I was loyal to.
That's so poignant. Yeah. Your loyalty is not to the company, it's to the people who work there just as hard as you, if not harder sometimes, right? More hours, whatever the case is. And the good ones, right? I mean, obviously your loyalty isn't to, some person with like a rotten personality that happens to also work at your company.
Right.
It's to the other people who work there, rely on the income from that job. That's who your loyalty is to. And I think that just helps. It acts as a catalyst for those important relationships that you develop further over time. And I think ours is symbolic of that. You were a ton of fun to work with, but I think an even better friend over the years. And the fact that we've kept in touch, for almost 20 years is testament to that, so.
Yeah.
Jeremy, thanks.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Office IQ. If you're looking for ways to accelerate your path to success, you can find more resources like this on our YouTube channel or at officeintelligence.com. We offer courses and other content that will literally change the direction of your career for the better. If there are any topics you'd like to hear more about or questions you'd like me to address on future episodes, you can send an email to jeff@officeintelligence.com.